So that was great. I love the way he ended that because we are running one of these villages, except it's now going to be known as the Independence Citadel. I think that was pretty good. So anyway, with that in mind, I figured it was appropriate that I talk about independence a little bit. So, why did we name it Independence Citadel? It's because it's something that I personally, and I think all of my team and co-founders, and I think everyone in this room can appreciate the concept of independence. It's something that comes up a lot, and I think that when it does, most people are referring to politics, right? So when you say the word independence, it's hard not to think of the phrase Declaration of Independence. It's hard not to think of, the independent nation of such and such. That it's often has this national connotation to it, a collectivist connotation. And secondly, when people use independence, and I myself have done this as a new father, you want your children to be independent. People will often talk about nurturing independence in their children and taking pride when the kid, takes their first bites with their own spoon and saying, "Look how independent you are." What is not often referred to is independence with relation to adults. We don't often compliment our friends or colleagues on how independent they are. It would almost sound pedantic, right? A bit like, you're so independent. It's almost like you're condescending to them. And the reason for this, I think, is because there's a general expectation that adults are independent in the way that we think of independence in terms of children, that they can feed themselves, clothe themselves, wipe their own asses, right? And so we, in other words, have a pretty low bar for independence. We consider someone independent when they no longer need an adult to literally feed them. But, we don't expect adults to be independent from their boss or their doctor or their grocery store or their government, right? We have sort of accepted these as inherent dependencies in society, because otherwise you would need to write your own paycheck, manage your own health, grow your own food, protect your own property. And that's really not a reasonable expectation for most people in the world today. And that doesn't mean that it's not a desirable state of affairs, right? We would like to be independent, and I think that we would like to be independent because we recognize that dependencies are potential, if not actualized, vulnerabilities. Every dependency in your life is a potential vulnerability that can and often is and almost always will be at some point exploited by somebody or some entity that is intent on breeding dependency for the purpose of control, power. So what's a couple examples of these? Western Union, right, is one that comes up a lot in the Bitcoin space. This is a dependency that many people have with international remittances. And if Western Union decides that you are no longer able to send money, or they are having issues, or whatever the case may be, you're in trouble. That dependency is a vulnerability, because as long as it works, but when it stops working, you're in trouble. And we know what solves that: Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin solves that. Another dependency that people have in their lives, which is pretty much an afterthought, is the grocery store, right? Food supply chains. And as long as they work, they work. But if the grocery store is experiencing supply chains, which is currently happening in some places, then what do, right? Now, as long as there's water and basic necessities, you're probably okay and won't feel it too bad. But we've seen in history times when that wasn't the case. The ability to grow your own food then would be a means of negating that dependency, becoming more independent. A third one, which is the one I really want to talk about here a little bit, is the sort of technological dependency that we all have and have come to accept in our lives. Take WhatsApp, for example. In the United States, WhatsApp is a toy that people play with or use to, do some chatting with their friends. But in some places around the world, WhatsApp is kind of a basic necessity. It's how they communicate. It is the primary rails of communication. And WhatsApp went down for like 3 hours or something like that a few weeks ago. And that was massive disruption, right? That brought awareness of a dependency that should shake you a little bit, okay? Because that's just the tip of the iceberg. When you think about the technological infrastructure of this country, of this world, it is highly, highly dependent, right? It's highly centralized. And we really, for the most part, do not have the ability to circumvent these centralized parties. We are dependent upon them for our data, communication, and less these days, financial needs. And that means we're beholden to them, okay? And as long as it works and they are benevolent and competent, then it's no problem. But as we know, right, dependencies are potential and eventually actualized vulnerabilities. And so I think we're starting to see more and more cracks in this system, and we need to begin taking measures to relieve that dependency. And thankfully, technology, being the double-edged sword that it is, can be used to breed dependency, and it can also be used to breed independence. And so it really is a race. This is not about some preordained future, right? We are absolutely on the current trajectory headed for a technological dystopian dependency nightmare, where it's not just some data that's sitting on Google that you're concerned about, but potentially, your locks on your doors and your thermostat and, the cameras in your house. You very much don't want to be dependent on some third-party company for those things to work, because if they stop working, either through incompetence or malice, you could find yourself in real danger. And so the path towards becoming digitally independent of the tech giants, is something that I personally and the team at Start9 have made our mission. Not for this year, not as a project, but for our lives. We are determined to help lower the barrier to entry of digital independence, because until now, it required an enormous amount of technical expertise, time, patience, energy, money, the resources necessary to achieve a reasonable degree of digital independence were simply unaffordable to the average person. And thankfully, modern technology with Bitcoin paving the way and showing us how it's done, how you can do decentralization, right? Not in a blockchain proof of work type of sense, but also in a community distributed effort type of sense, open source programming, code, and building systems that are inherently designed with easily accessible exit routes so that we don't ourselves become any kind of centralized entity. So anyway, this is a very short talk. I could dive into a lot of details here. Can somebody give me a finger of how many minutes I have here? I have 1 minute. So, all right, so let me say this. The essence of digital independence is self-hosting. It is this idea that you use your own physical hardware that is running your own self-hosted open source services that you and you alone control and use for your computing needs, generally speaking. This is running a Bitcoin node, this is running a Lightning node, this is running your own personal cloud data storage, this is running P2P messaging protocols, so that you don't have to open up your phone and ask permission every time you want to text your significant other, because quite frankly, it's embarrassing, it's undignified, and it's not worthy of a proper human future. And so if you want to learn a little bit more about how to actually practically achieve these things, low hanging, okay? It's not perfect yet. It's not the push button swipe, but it's getting there. Come on over to our Digital Independence Citadel and have a conversation with us. We'd love to show you what we've created, what's coming down the pipeline and how today you can actually learn some things to de-Google your life and, be more independent. So thank you.